Hey, Jim, we're going to see if our one local guy can come up and do it.
You didn't have the office know about it, didn't you?
What'd you say, Junior?
You did have the stadium, so they could take it over there next week.
Yeah, I hope
I'm Steve Little.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to Steve. Great picture. Great place to go.
Thank you. I think that's it. That was not take back.
You're the boss.
Okay, I like this. They're listening to
I
her.
did take that.
She drives and donuts and everything.
Good morning, folks.
Morning.
Oh,
Everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the North Carolina Transportation Museum today and our train show. Glad to have you with us. We got a big day planned with speakers, and you're about to hear one now. And of course, we've got our train show out here in the roundhouse. A lot of other things go on around the site, so be sure to ask anybody if you need anything. It'll get you to the right place. We've got site maps to use. First up this morning for our presentation is Mr. Preston Claytor. The Claytor name is synonymous with the NW 611 and the Norfolk Southern Steam program. So Preston's here. He's very much involved, obviously, with the restoration of the 611, with the fire of the 611 motors. He's going to give you a presentation about the restoration of the motor. And then, right, Scott Lindsay's going to come and guide a tour through it. We'll just kind of take a trip out there and take a look at the engineering process. So we're glad to have it here to be have the work done. It's been a big draw for us. Who's Preston?
thanks, Mark. I never get an introduction. We do this for 3 days a week for the public, or when there's an add-on. But I will say, Mark has got a job for life.
You know what's in charge.
He did the voice for the Streamliner event, announcing each locomotive, right?
That's right.
And, you know, he's got one of those station radio voices, you know, now on the turntable. All the way from Upper Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, the such and such F7 is now.
I could use you to write my script. That would have been
We got the radio voice for that, whereas, you know, I got fired about, 2 locomotives on that job. And I appreciate that because, you know, we do this, I never get an introduction. But anyway, thanks very much. This is a special event, and I have changed. If anybody's been to the public presentation before that we do Monday through Friday, or excuse me, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we've only been doing it for a few weeks. But I've changed that presentation a little bit, and I've added a lot of stuff, so it's going to be a little bit more today than you would have seen before. But at any rate, welcome to the North Carolina Transportation Museum and our home away from home at the Virginia Museum of Transportation. I told them, you know, being from the South, that they give me to do all these tours they ever wanted. They got Krispy Kreme donuts, back, and coffee. So I said, I'm telling my wife I had Krispy Kreme donuts. But at any rate, let's talk about the 611. I got to start out by saying, if anybody not heard of 611, I mean, I got one, some say on a Sunday afternoon, and said, well, I just saw the tour and I signed up. Because it makes a difference, you know, how much I talk about it. Anybody not heard of 611 or know any of the history thereof? Okay, I'll bump it up a notch based on my audience. Based on my audience, what is the 611? You know, if I hit the page up, then, you know, there's a nice picture of 611. You know, taken in the 90s. But in order to talk about 611, you can't talk about it without talking about the Norfolk Railroad. And this isn't really a history lesson on the NNW, but 611 was one of 14 J-class locomotives, as we all know, that were built in 1950. But what's not on the board is one of my favorite statistics. In 1950, American Railroads, specifically, largely Electromotive Division, EMD, or the General Motors Division, built over 1,000. I didn't know, they gave away my reference material from the David P. Morgan article in the office over here, which I'm getting back. I have the exact number. It's around 1,000 passenger locomotives, all diesel. In 1950, American Railroads built 3 steam passenger locomotives. 611, 612, and in August of 1950, only a couple of 3 months behind the 611, they outshot shop the 613. So it was one of the last class of 3. But to talk about the NW, Norfolk Western Railway ran primarily from Norfolk, Virginia to Cincinnati. Okay. Well, let's do a little geography lesson in topography. When you leave Norfolk, it's flat as a pancake all the way to Petersburg. You start hitting some hills to Lynchburg, and by the time you're getting close to Roanoke, you're in the mountains. Now, normal railroads would have attacked the problem, well, we need a high-speed locomotive, steam locomotive for the flatlands, and we need a puller for the mountains. And the way they would have done that is, in traditional steam locomotive design, is wheel diameter. If you had an 80 or 90-inch wheel, it would run 100 miles an hour. If you wanted something that would pull in the mountains, you went down into the 63 to 68 range on a passenger locomotive. The NW design engineers said, we don't want to do that. They, through counterbalancing, when I say counterbalancing, the weight in the driving wheel that offsets the rod has got to be just right. And the engineers got it just right. Because the 611 and her sisters would run up to 110 miles an hour on the flatlands and could still pull the mountains in the Bluefield with a 15-car passenger train and keep the schedule. And that's the key, and keep the schedule. But truly it was one of the most modern locomotives designed. It had all the modern designs in 1950. We find drawings over here, another little tidbit for this tour, that they were still making modifications to the J classes up into the late 50s, 57, 58. We find modifications to engineering drawings on these locomotives. All roller bearing. This was unheard of at the time. Even the NW's last steam locomotive they built didn't have roller bearings, but for passenger engines they wanted 100% roller bearings. 300 miles between services. Compare that to the Southern Railway that the average steam locomotive ran 100 miles between services. And these locomotives saw 15,000 miles a month. The 544 back here has a frame that's put together with bolts. 611 has a frame that's a single cast piece from the front to the back, about over 85-foot section. One of the things that's very interesting, and more little tidbits for this group, where's the air tank on the 611? Anybody ever see? You look on here, you'll see a tank either on the front of the side or under the boiler on that 544, where you store your compressed air. Anybody ever seen one on 611? Or any of the J's? It's cast into the frame. You'll never see it. It's cast into the frame. So we had the UT guy tell us, all right, well, if we got to change that, if that gets a hole in it, we're in kind of serious trouble. So what's the thickness? Well, we found it was 7/8 of an inch thick at the top and still well over half an inch at the bottom. I think it'll last a few more years because if you looked at some of these others out here that hold there, you'd find probably an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch steel holding that air. Yes?
Where did they cast the frame?
I think it's Granite City, Illinois. And one part of the restoration we're doing this go around, they had a frame casting on every General Steel casting that came out of Illinois. They had a little builder's plate that's about 4 inches square, and we want to restore those 4 plates that are on the locomotive. You'd have to really know what you're looking at to see it. But it's got all the patent numbers that are on it. But that was one of the most, for any modern steam locomotive, regardless of who built it, the single piece cast frame, it was the most labor saving because you put a frame together with bolts, it's subject to all kinds of problems you may run into, vibration and maintenance. And that was a big. When I give a standard tour here, I like to bring a prop from an oil can. This is the engineer. We all see the videos of the old steam yacht, the engineers oiling around. Well, guess what? On the 611, what happened to that oil can, on this 540? Why is it even the display in the cab? The engineer got up there and put the oil can on the back end so the oil would stay warm. It would just have a little holder about that big. On an NW modern engine, you know, a J, an A, or a Y6, no holder for that oil can. They didn't have an oil can for the engineer. It was all force-fed and modern lubrication. So that was done. All right, I've got an eye chart for you here, and I realize it's not. But that's the specification and statistics for the 611. But I call your attention mainly to that horsepower 5200. And think of it in these terms. When NS buys a modern locomotive today, it's about 4,000 horsepower. And we're developing 5,200 horsepower. Now, this was a passenger engine. This wasn't a freight engine. But that's really unheard of at 5,200 horsepower at about 40 miles per hour. The key today is factor of adhesion. And that's how well it holds the rails. It doesn't slip. In other words, if at low speed, if our engineer just decides to put the throttle on the roof, it's going to slip. And it's a skill for a locomotive engineer to realize how much power he can put to the rail at what speed without having the engine slip. If you listen to all kinds of recordings, you'll hear an engine slipping. It may or may not be the engineer. Don't blame it on him every time. He can hit flange oilers, water, things he's not aware of. It's not always him trying to overdo it. But that's factor of adhesion is a large part of that. Okay. I can always come back to this if anybody has questions on specific stats. We always try to show lots of pictures in these things. You'd probably rather see pictures of 611 or hear me ramble on. But this is a good shot because I like to picture the diesel in the background. You see comparison shots. These engines are much more massive. And we're limited in where we could go in the future with the locomotive simply because it was a massive engine designed to run on the N&W between Norfolk and Cincinnati. They knew the clearances. We don't always have that. We run into places where we find bridges that might go like that won't clear our cylinders. The next shot I don't like, but I'm going to show it to you. I want you, before I go there, take a look at the stack color. When I say stack color, the color of the smoke. It was a big deal in the 1950s, smoke reduction. This was a shot taken in the early 90s, and I hate this picture. But frequently, for a photo run by, there's only two things that would cause generally this level of smoke. But one of them, a photo run by, they said, make smoke for the photographers. Fireman. The other thing what's the other thing that would cause that level of smoke? A student fireman. Which we get from time to time. But that's more of a relative. In all honesty, these locomotives would run with a clean stack. With proper combustion. N&W was blessed with really good coal in the 40s and 50s. In Williamson, West Virginia, they got it straight out of the mine and put it into the coal tipple for the locomotives without ever hitting a hopper car or a truck. These engines will run with a clean stack, and our coal will get to the NS purchasing for us. Will be very good nugget coal that will have the ability run a clean stack. All right, let's talk also about how I like to talk about a project here. And here's where I deviate from my regular presentation. But why 611 and how did we get here? In February of 2013, and it predated this, we said, 611 makes a great backdrop in Norfolk, Virginia for a kid's birthday party. But how much revenue does a birthday party on a caboose bring in? And my favorite picture, which I cannot for the life of me get them to stop circulating and running, is a picture of the engine what we call the salad. They planted flowers. I hate that picture. But, he wasn't making any money. But what if you were the Louvre and you could take the Mona Lisa and put it on a complete tour? You think you'd make more money running it around? Now, I'm not suggesting that the Louvre's ever going to do that. But we have a #1 exhibit that has a possibility. That's what this study focused on. We had steam experts, safety experts, business experts. The business, and remember now, a lawyer will tell you that 90% of all questions asked, the answer is money. Okay. So somehow money is going to be tied into the answer, and that's true in this case. It's got to be a business plan. But 611 sitting in Roanoke as that backdrop for the birthday parties isn't going to do it. Now, you can get donations for big, sexy projects for museums, and museum management's not easy. give it this big sexy project, which might be 611, it might be a new gallery. You know, it's certainly a project for said museum. It's not easy. Nobody wants to give money to pay the light bill. Okay? It's not easy to run a museum and have a general operating fund to pay that back office stuff. But if we have the locomotive, we can also pay. Do you not think that, see a man back here with Virginia Tech hat on? Does Virginia Tech football not help support girls volleyball? And it's, you know, they take their #1 sport, but girls volleyball is just as important in Tech to their athletics director. It's all part of their program. And just like our aviation gallery is a part of our program in Roanoke. But we can take 611 and be a traveling ambassador, and yes, hopefully bring some more money back to the museum. There's our goal. All right, we're going to do this. Now we've got the tiger by the tail. What are we going to do? Well, 611 is that anchor exhibit. The kids want it for their birthday party. They want it on display. We're hurting museum attendants in Roanoke, but y'all won't come here to Norfolk, not Norfolk, we're at Spencer for the display. But we just don't have room. I would love to have this museum here. Look at this. They've got 50-some acres here that they own, and in reality, they go beyond that fence. It's over 100 when you factor all of what they're really using. We have 7 or 8 acres, maybe 10. We just don't have a lot of space. And we don't have space there to restore 611, isn't it? All right, next problem. Let's go outside in the valley here and find a place. Well, we can't go to the East End shops. There's a real good news story for Roanoke there. Freight Car America is building hopper cars as fast as they can crank them out. That facility is in full production in Roanoke, the East End shops. And the locomotive shops, where 611 was built, has got a big GE project going, and they're using every inch. So we can't go to the NS and say, hey, we'd like to redo it in Roanoke. No, they're using it. No need to even ask. But what about some other building? It'd be great to say, built in Roanoke, rebuilt in Roanoke. Great campaign. And not really any place suitable. Plus, we wouldn't have been able to see it. So, we had to find, we said, all right, before we do this, we got to look. So we looked around, and we found the North Carolina Transportation Museum. It's close to Roanoke. It's only 145 miles. Some of y'all might have even come down from Roanoke. But we've got this beautiful roundhouse out here. We can do tours here. If we were in the ABC building in Roanoke or Alabama or someplace like that, you wouldn't be able to come in and see it. Here, we got a great glass window. We can do these tours, and the public can actually participate and see the 611. And obviously, I'll put in some more plugs in a minute for the NCTM. So we found that, but maintenance building, that long term, it's not going to work. You know, we put this locomotive back in Roanoke. There we are back in Roanoke. You know, what do? We have to work on it. Well, we got the pavilion shed, but that's not really conducive to doing work. It's a public display area. So we decided we need a maintenance building in Roanoke. We want a building with 2 tracks. One of them will have a 120-foot inspection pit. We can put any engine in the collection of it. And again, the public can see this. We designed the building so you're going to have a window, just like you see the 544 out here, where you can look into that shop. So that's on our radar, and we're at the phase now where we've done the basic engineering and survey. We just need a little more money, and I'll talk about some money in a minute. Again, 90% of all those questions about money. But we want, just like they've done here, this is a great example of a museum where the public can see work before. And finally, we're a museum. The actual freight shed in Roanoke is an NNW original design building, and we would like our maintenance facility to look like that's a picture of the NNW Lubritorium where they service steam locomotives. If you took that and stretched it, these were designed for service, not for maintenance. We need something designed for maintenance. You have to be able to, quick answer, get a forklift around all sides of the locomotive easily to get to it with an overhead crane. These didn't have overhead cranes. But the NNW built these god-awful buildings with this glass block, which is real cheap to put in. That's the good news. I just don't think it's the most aesthetic thing, but it was functional because it let light in. And it's in that freight house as well. All right, back to talking about 611 and the contrast. Because we're here in the heart of Southern Railway country, I like to compare Southern and the NNW locomotive. But Southern bought its last new steam locomotive in 1926. Southern purchased its first diesel in 1939. Southern operated its last steam engine in June of 1953. And N&W built its last steam locomotive in December of 53 in Roanoke, outshopped around Christmas time. An S1A was the last steam engine built for a U.S. railroad in the country. But in 1955, N&W bought its first diesel. But we all probably know about Y6s and Class A's. They built three other actual classes of locomotives up until 1953 that were massive, and N&W built them all themselves. But let's look at the contrast here. There's the 611, a 1950 product next to the 4501, a great engine, a staple of the Southern Railway steam program. This picture taken in the early 90s in Chattanooga, but you can see the size difference, the massive size difference. But there's also 30, 40 years worth of new technology on the left that's not there on the right. And if you think 611 is big, you compare it to the 1218. And there's a picture taken probably about 1987 of the two together. And 611 looks small compared to the 1218. If the 1218 were here, it would not fit in the back shop or the roundhouse. We couldn't get it in there. Physically wouldn't go. 611, you'll see, fills up the entire restoration bay, and that's without its tender. Why rebuild 611? We talked about the study and all that, so I won't go into that, but the real impetus here is the 21st century steam that NS has done. They've invited us to participate, but somebody says, what does that mean? Now, I've had to explain this to the board in Roanoke. It means you have to have a fully compliant or a locomotive that exceeds Federal Railroad standards. And they would like to use 611, and said they would. They have used publicly the word crown jewel. We have one of the crown jewels in NS heritage fleet. But the key that no one gets is the 21st century steam is not in business to haul you and me on a public excursion. It's designed for employee and intercompany relations. And maybe they'll incorporate some additional public excursions at their discretion. Okay? And that's what it's designed for. A lot of their employees have never seen some of their families have never even gotten a chance to ride a train. This gives a family a chance to ride a train, understand the heritage, and they've done a good job of touring a lot of their system for these locations so employees and their families can ride. Yep, and once in a while we may get to run a public excursion. But until 1994 or 5, NS was in the steam engine business. They don't want to be in the steam engine business. It means they have to maintain employees, department, and everything. What do we want? We're here for employee recognition and public relations. This is like NASCAR today. It's a different world than it was in the 80s and 90s. We're here at 611. If we wish to ever leave the gate here, we're in the public relations business. We're not in the steam engine hauling business. Okay, yes, we have the opportunity. We'd like to pay to ride, and we'd love to do that. But at the end of the day, the real reason we have the opportunity to leave the gate on private property, private tracks, is we can provide value to our being out there, and it's public relations. And that's what we have to bring in to give. I meet somebody on an airplane, what do you do? Suppose Goodyear didn't have to maintain a blimp department. If Goodyear, what's the real purpose of the blimp? Yeah, they make a few shekels circling the golf course. And from NBC, from relaying it back. But what's the real purpose of the blimp? That big Goodyear advertisement floating around over the golf course that everybody's seen. But what if Goodyear had the chance to have called the Blimp Museum? Hey, got the PGA in Louisville this week. Y'all got the blimp ready? Bring me a pilot and a blimp. We'll pay you. And they didn't have to do that. The business model for them? It absolutely would. This gets NS out of the steam business and puts a historic thing back in the museum where it belongs. And the model is working at Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, our friends in Fort Wayne, and we're developing the same thing. So it's all about public relations, and that's why we're rebuilding 611. All right, talk about a little bit about NCTM here. The foundation here and museum is partner. Now, big difference, so that you understand. North Carolina Transportation Museum we're on state property right now. State of North Carolina's property. All right. The museum is owned and operated by the state with the assistance of the North Carolina Transportation Museum Foundation, a fully tax-exempt 501c3 corporation. It's private. That's who organized this event today, the tour. And it's the state paid to rebuild that back shot. But the foundation organizes this event, and it's really a public-private model that works great. In Roanoke, we don't have that luxury of the state paying any money. We get no state funding in Roanoke, which makes life a little harder. But the Spencer Museum here said, y'all come down here, it benefits people. Some of y'all might be here today because you get the chance to see 611. That benefits them. When we got here, we hardly had a pipe wrench. Open up the tool room, y'all go get your pipe wrench. If you break it, replace it. Got that ladder? Our ladders are all got yellow spray paint on them. Just make sure you put it back where you got it. These people have just rolled out the red carpet for the 611, and they have been so accommodating to us in helping us here in Spencer. The lawyers say, oh, you have to watch this contract, and all this. I got here, and hey, everything's fine. If we have a problem, and we've had a few, they'll pick up the phone and they'll call us, and we'll correct it, but it's a great working relationship. And these people have really done a great job of helping us. The local area here, they have all the industrial supplies that you can imagine. I've been through so much. As a project director here, I'm paying the bills and air gas down here. But all I can do is pick up the phone, and it's a can-do attitude right here. Yeah, Bubba, you need more oxygen settling, I'll get it on the truck this afternoon. Welding shops, machine shops. And if they don't have it here, oh, don't worry, we can go to Charlotte or Greensboro and pick it up. It's a great place to put this thing together in a real can-do attitude by all the suppliers around here. And finally, what can we do? Well, we hope to be able to bring 611 back down here after we get it back to Roanoke for an excursion to benefit the foundation. Let's talk about the rebuild. It should take 6 to 9 months. What do we have to do? It's pretty simple. Tear it down, fix the boiler, put it back together. A little more complicated than that. But, well, I'll show you some pictures in here. We do have to get it down to the boiler shell. We remove the flues and the superheater units. And this is the process we're in now. Survey the boiler, including ultrasonic tests of the boiler and firebox, and prepare the scope of work. Okay, what that means is the ultrasound. Everybody, the most frequently asked question in the last 2 months is, did it pass the ultrasonic test? The ultrasonic test is not a pass-fail test. One of the most interesting facts is the guy that came in and did the ultrasonic test, which determines metal thickness, a pressure-bearing surface. The same guy that they called when they wanted to raise the Confederate submarine Hunley in Charleston Harbor. They knew before they picked it up, they wanted to know, is it too thin to pick up, or is it going to break in 2 pieces? So this guy put on his diver's outfit, goes down with his UT stuff, and tells them how thick the hull on the Hunley. This guy was a professional and good. But at the end of the day, we took a little jump drive memory stick for the computer, plugged it into his computer, and had 2,000 points of data. Then the ultrasonic data goes to a professional engineer who looks at NMW as-built calculations, looks at his readings, and does some wizardry, because I'm not a mechanical engineer, I studied business in school, and determines whether or not the locomotive will withstand 300 pounds of pressure. And that process, he's got it down. He said that document, supporting document, could be 200 pages long. The NMW built one complicated locomotive for this pressure vessel. So that process is going on. What do we know so far from the ultrasonic test? 611 will need a new rear tube sheet. since it had been built, N&W put 3 sets of flues in it through the 50s. It had 2 under its NS era, and we're adding another. The rear flue sheet, which is subject to all that heat from the firebox close in, has just got a lot of pitting and heat. And it's showing signs. It's kind of raising its hand, said, you know, I might make it, but I'm not sure. And not sure doesn't cut it. Now's the time to replace it. It's not that large a job. Actually, I just bought the new piece of metal for this thing. Only $1,200. It's all labor because that flue sheet will have to be bent around. But finally, once we get that done, repair appliances and brake systems, appliances, things like our air compressors, air pumps, injectors, all the ancillary things, dynamos, feed water pumps, all that's got to be gone through. Finally, reassemble, test fire, put all that insulation back on that we took off, and the last thing it gets is paint. And I'm pleased to say, you know, show of support, we have an indication from Davis Frost out of Lynchburg, a paint company and supplier to Norfolk Southern, going to donate the paint to us, which is a good news story, because the paint is, that's not an inconsequential, because it not only gets primer, it gets paint, clear coat, and the things got to match the N&W color. So we're excited that, number one, they're going to donate us paint, but it's also paint that's made in Virginia, right there in Lynchburg. So it's an encouraging thing that Davis Frost is doing that for us. All right, so we started here at the, anybody come to the Streamliners event here? So a lot of you did. They put on a great show here. And, you know, there's Casey Thomas and the NS photographer taking a picture of a bunch of us getting ready to loosen the first nut and start the official rebuild. So Wick Mormon, the NS chairman, actually loosened a nut on the front of the engine. One of the people who shall remain nameless said, do we have to say it? We might need that nut. You don't have any idea how many we're going to burn off in the process? That's what we master a car for. I'll buy new nuts. But there's the real start. This is a crew out of the Agenstein Roundhouse that came down to help us. Luke here is getting ready to really start the rebuild when he loosens that nut. You see they're getting ready to climb in the nose. Everybody said, how do you get the nose off? It took about 45 minutes. You take 4 bolts off inside the eye hook there for this turned upside down. He passes the eye hook in. We put it on that side. You hook up with the shooting boom forklift, and the thing comes right off. It ain't a big deal. But the thing about Luke is when he loosened that nut, he went back to the next one and the next one and the next one and kept going the whole way back. Started on June the 3rd. We did this outside because we had a lot more room. They were looking out for us because the weather was cool and really no rain in June here. So we had 6 weeks of good weather that turned sour on us about the time we got in the shop. Here we see them, they're removing a superheater unit. Today over here we'll see they're testing superheater units, putting a hydrostatic test on them and checking them for any kind of leakage or anything like that. Here's the front flue sheet with the tube still in it. This is looking in from the front, okay? Before the flues were removed. To get those flues out, that's a big job in itself. You have to take a welder and cut a torch and cut 4 lines in that thing. They beat them in, cut them on the other side, and pull them out. It went on for quite a while. And the next picture coming up here, you'll see our block insulation. This is about the mid-course. That's the steam dome up here. And that's the block insulation that will have to be replaced. All that had to be removed and put in the dumpster. It's not reusable. I've learned this in the last 3 days of talking to the supplier out of Benton, and hopefully we'll put all this back in for you. It's called a Cal Sil. It's very lightweight. Non-asbestos, if anybody's getting ready to ask that question. There's no asbestos on the engine. But we would score it on the back. It's a block that's about 6 inches by about 2 or 3 feet. That would weigh a couple pounds. It's really lightweight stuff. And the stuff that you put up here is mud. You mix it like concrete, you pass it up in a 5-gallon bucket. It's an entry-level job. You slap it on there in between the block. Just that you can put a block on like this a lot quicker than you mix mud, and it's cheap. Here is a picture inside. Now, if we ignore Mr. Sadler here who's vacuuming, you will see the rear flue sheet. That's what we're going to replace. It just, it's got to be cut out cut it all the way around. You know, you see stay bolts. These are stay bolts that actually hold it. The front flue sheet, of course, is riveted to the boiler. But that water space where you see all those bars going through there, it's a crown sheet at the top and inside the combustion chamber. So they'll go, that piece of metal that today is a flat piece of metal about 100 inches square roughly, and I'm off by some inches. Has got to not only have every one of these holes cut into it at the exact diameter and size for the flues and tubes, but that's an actual flange there or a curved piece of metal. You know, when you bend something, you can weaken it. So this isn't an entry-level job, but we've got to get that cut out, removed, taken. It's going to go probably some shop. The contractor is going to put all those new flue and tube holes in it, and more importantly, then he's got to put the flange in it without weakening it, and he's got to stress relieve it. There's a lot to do, and then it's got to be welded back in by a certified welder.
Do you fabricate that here or is that?
Going off-site.
You use the same kind of metal that they used 60 years ago, or what model?
Here's the first thing we look. Probably, you know, there's a set standard, but the first rule of steam locomotive rebuilding is don't try to reinvent what the N&W figured out. We had those problems over the years with some of these, you know, things. If you went back, let me go back 3 slides and give you an example. They seem to think in the early 80s, the previous administration put this together, that by pulling these, taking 2 tubes out, putting 2 washout plugs in there, you know, you'd be able to wash out the boiler. The problem is when we put all this junk back in here, you know, not even a skinny midget could get to the, you know, those 2 plugs. It just isn't going to happen. You know, it isn't going to happen. So we're going to put 2 tubes back in those 2 slots. So we try not to re-engineer what the N&W has done. Probably the metal, you'd have to ask a metallurgist, but there's a standard for boiler steel. And the key is to make sure you meet that standard, which even the N&W probably stuck to the standard. But that's the dry pipe is over his head there as well, inside that boiler. Where that space where he's standing would be all those tubes and flues, and obviously there wouldn't be anybody in there if the tubes and flues. And then one of the other big questions we get, what do you do with all the parts? Well, they occupy a small piece of backstop back here. And there you see our running boards. You recognize these are grates. There's the bullet nose. There's the sand dome. There's all sorts of other odds and ends parts back there. But if you haven't walked back and seen this backstop, it's amazing what the state of North Carolina did to rebuild it. It is beautiful. There's an overhead crane in there that does not work. 611 could not have gone in there physically, wouldn't make the curve to get in the building. Southern Railway didn't design it for good locomotives. And it's really not the best place. Plus there's a DC-3 in there, you know. But it's just, man, you stand in there and look back, it's 3 football fields long, and the state of North Carolina just did a great job putting that together. Here you see the 611 on the turntable at the Streamliners event. And one of the things that's interesting in this shot, 611 does fit. We measured it before we came down here. That's a 100-foot turntable, and look where that front wheel is. We got 9 inches of clearance. But guess what? The N&W designed it that way because the N&W had 100-foot turntables. They didn't make turntables at 102.5 inches. You know, you bought them off the shelf from some bridge company, and they came in 100, 110, 120-foot tables. But the 611 was designed to fit on a 100-foot table. And it does have overhang. The overall length of the engine is just under 110 feet. So there's 5 feet hanging over on either end. But that was taken in June. Now let's look what it looked like after we've done all this assembly and strip. That's undressed, as we say. Running boards, lagging, and everything removed. That picture was taken just before we separated the engine and tender to go in the roundhouse. And here we'll see, there it's been separated with the little Duke engine that they have here as a switcher to put the engine in the back. The next picture, here's one of our volunteers removing the builder's plate off the side of the engine. I always say, in case I let him get it before some rail fan gets it. Maybe. Here's the back head of the locomotive with all the lagging. That's all mud with some of that block squeezed in there where they could. There's a guy up here, and all that block has been removed in there now. And there's one of our volunteers up here servicing valves today. So even that has changed dramatically. All of these valves you see, we've got a chrome supplier here, and we've re-chromed all these things. The engine and every piece of chrome that we can get to that really hadn't been re-chromed since then. We found a great local supplier that really makes this stuff look shiny and new. One of our guys came in this afternoon, or this morning, and he carrying this handle. I said, what in the world is that? I didn't recognize it. He said, that's the handle of the firebox. It's going to the chromer. Once again, get re-chromed. Pictures of, we use this shooting boom forklift, which was a great tool. It was an expensive tool, but it was paid for itself many times over, that we just would sling parts and unbolt them and pull them off. But as you can see, they got plenty of room to get that shooting boom forklift over there, which is what's needed in order to get to the side of the engine. There again is that working on that rear flue chute from inside, the barrel of the boiler. And again, the picture of the locomotive on the turntable. Finally, that's all I've got before we go on the tour, but I'd love to answer any questions while we're in the air conditioning. Yes, sir. We're still adding, and we think $750,000, but it's a moving target. I will say we make use of volunteer labor where we can, getting really skilled people like that flue chute job. That's not a volunteer job. We've got to go get a contractor to do the really skilled stuff. We're pretty judicious with the money on the Spencer end. We look to save every nickel. As I say, we've been donating an awful lot of money, and it's like the CEO of the company protecting the stockholder's money. It's the same type of thing. You donate $10, we want to spend it wisely and not waste it. Yes? No, we pulled it with a diesel, and I should have a picture of that in here somewhere, but I don't know that picture. NS brought it down for us, and they've been very good to us. NS made a donation to the project for $1.5 million. But they don't advertise the fact, but I like to point out that they brought it down to us. We got some with their NS heritage, or NW heritage. And I can't say enough good about that company. But they gave us $1.5 million. But we've got another $1.1 million that's coming in the door from lots of other people who have given everything from $100,000 in one check down to $6.11. And we've had over 2,000 donations. And we appreciate all of it. We appreciate the 6-year-old that donated $6.11 of his allowance money just as much as $100,000. So we've had all that support, over 2,000 donations. And from 18 countries. When I talk to a Rotary group or something like that, I put them, especially in Rome, this engine has an international following. We had somebody come from Japan just to see the Legal Museum, which I'm not saying is a fairly boring event in my mind. Watching it come back, okay, we could get a little more interested. Yes.
Are there specific plans for excursion trips in the future? And how can you make sure that
Well, there's two different questions. We will begin, we can't plan an excursion until Scott Lindsay, who's in the back here now, tells me that he's confident that we can make an excursion. But still, we have to begin the planning process, and we hope to make next year's schedule. And we hope we'll be running. All right, how do you get tickets? Well, we anticipate that everything will be done online. But one way to get guaranteed seats for these excursions, we have a program where we give $611 as a donation to the project. You're on the list for early purchase of tickets, which all but assures you the ability. We'll open up online sales or phone sales before they're released to the general public. The other thing is at a $5,000 level, we begin to allow early purchase of first-class seats, which we anticipate having first-class cars as well. That allows you to, and at certain levels, if you see me in the back after this, we include tickets at certain levels for, a certain number based on the, 5 and 6 figure donations. Yes, sir.
Where are the coaches now?
Most of the coaches on the train, if not all of the coaches, are owned by Norfolk Southern. They have about 500 seats roughly that come with every excursion. So we generally don't lease coaches. We lease first class cars to fill out because NS doesn't make any first class cars available. Yes, sir.
What is the status of the maintenance facility for the engine in Roanoke?
Well, if we do the math, we're not at the $3.5 million we're looking for in order to begin. And the worst thing we could do is start a building or a shop building and get about halfway there, or just have a dirt floor or something like that. We want to raise the money. The key is keeping the administration costs down and channeling as much of that money to the facility that we can. And I'm also the chairman of the committee, and it's a struggle that we have all the time. But that's just part of what you go through. But we think we need probably another $800,000-900,000 before we want to break ground on it. Yes, sir.
611, the last surviving class.
Yes, it was the only one to survive the scrappers. And Scott and I were having that. There's a railfan lore that in 1959, October of '59, or the fall of '59, NS sort of had its farewell to steam tour, and they needed a J to run the trips. 611 and 3 of our sisters were in the deadline at Bluefield. 611 was first out, and the railfan lore said, well, they got 611 because it was the first one out. And Scott and I laughed at that. Because, that would mean they just left the decision to the yard crew to take the first one in the line. No, the roundhouse foreman who was going to have to get it ready to go, and his general foreman probably walked over, looked at the engine, looked at the data on which one had his last shopping, and said, hey, what's the best engine? Well, 611. It'd been through the shop in 1956 for a complete overhaul due to an accident he's got a truck river. That's the reason we think that the 611 is not because it was the first one at the deadline. That's a Bob Little picture. Not one of my favorites, because if you look in there, you'll see a diesel in the back. That was taken in '94 after NS had gone to an all-red train. And that was one of the problems in the later years. NS was trying to haul 28 cars. Our historian, Lewis Newton, has said, look, why do you want to overtax this antique engine? And NS had kind of gotten to that period in the late 90s. If people wanted to come, they just kept adding more cars. I'd rather run more trips, which I may or may not get the chance to do. But we're going to probably be sticking more in line with what the engine was designed to pull, rather than, how many more cars can we keep adding to it to get it so long. You get 30 cars, you got not only problems with pulling the train, you get all the people you have to manage. At station stops.
Along the New River on the last.
That is Christiansburg Mountain. Climbing Christiansburg Mountain. I wish I knew milepost, but that's just short, I believe, of Shawsville Tunnel, or where Shawsville Tunnel used to be before they daylighted it. Yes, sir.
I believe I read someplace that one of the reasons why 611 lasted this long is that it went on PR tour, and it was actually taken to Australia. Is that correct?
No. It's never been west of Kansas City, let alone Australia.
Is the facility here better suited to restore this locomotive than the one in Mississippi that rebuilt it in 1918?
It was in Alabama when it was rebuilt in '82. But the answer was that was an NS facility, and that facility, has been repurposed for other use by Norfolk Southern, and it was not an option. It probably would have been better there because there was more space. You'll see 611 is kind of. We had to get a shoehorn to get the engine in the shop.
What kind of work do you have to do to the tender, and are you going to redo the water tender also?
The water tender is currently in service. The A tank, the canteen, is currently in service here. That's my last phone call before I walked in here.
So 65's got it.
But we'll have that back. It's currently on one in Fort Wayne, and we'll share it with them. We got some work to do to it, but not much. When it comes back off lease, the actual water tender, we're just cleaning the water space, the water rag. We got work to do to the stoker and all that, just to improve it to be ready to go. And finally, it's got to be. We've started the process. You'll see out here of filling in some of the weld seams. We're not there yet. The tender's kind of taking a back seat while we're working in here. We want to do that work inside, but right now the other inside bay is being used for superheater unit testing.
The 611
No, 604 was the only J to get a booster, and it was quickly proven they didn't need it because it's got enough starting tractor effort. The booster was just a maintenance nightmare. Anybody else before we go over? But 1218 was in the middle of a rebuild in 1992, and it literally was in kit form when they told them to stop working on it. And consequently, if you ever go to Roanoke and look at the firebox is largely disassembled, and it would take millions of dollars of work, boiler work, just to get it back to where it was. The running gear was partially rebuilt, and I'd like to. My theme is, Scott's the one that took it apart, and before, as we say, before Scott starts parking in the spaces with the blue sticker, we need to put it all back together while he's young. But, if somebody came along with a couple of $3 million to help us finish that shop and do it, could we do it? Absolutely we could do it. But it's about money. And I get to go back to what we're saying. It's all about the money.
Are you doing any videography of the work as it's going on to produce something later on about the restoration?
Yeah, the board authorized a video project, and in the meantime, we're on Facebook. We try to post. Sherry George posts. I post, and usually it gets reposted to the Fire Up 611 Facebook page. But we're pretty well documenting a lot of it. But here's the sad part, and I have trouble getting people at Roanoke to understand this. The actual rebuild is kind of like watching paint dry. A lot of it goes on inside, and not much happens fast. There's a few interesting events, but for the most part, and our volunteers are learning this. There's not excitement every day.
Where is this?
Currently in St. Louis, headed for Roanoke. The question was, where's the 2156? But it's going to be prepped for some point in the future, and I don't know when, for movement to Roanoke for display. That engine is not in great shape. Yes, sir.
I may have missed it. You said, are you employees in the room?
There are 3 of us that are employees, and I should have kept my day job. That actually pays some. But we have a chief mechanical officer and a general foreman who's rotated out right now, and myself, and I'm the project. I just manage the money and the volunteers and all that sort of stuff. Everyone else is volunteer or contractor. So we have a contractor in the shop.
Do you work for VMT?
Yeah, we're all part of VMT, Virginia Museum of Transportation.
Related to grab and lighter speed.
Well, it depends on which generation and all that. Yeah, somewhere in there. Uncle cousin.
What relationship are you?
Well, my father was Robert, my uncle was Graham, my cousin is Graham, and I can kind of go
So your
on.
father was the president of Norfolk, wasn't he?
Yeah, that was my father.
Your brother was the fireman on the 611 on the first run?
I don't think, that was probably me.
Oh, was you? I thought his name was Robert also.
No, that was probably me. I have a brother, Robert, that one.
That's when it derailed the diesel.
On the loop, yeah, that's a long story. Anything else before we head over to Scott's here to kind of take us on the tour?